us a little bit about this one. I personally love this one. This is kind of my favorite.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites also. They're all my favorites for one reason or the other. But I did this with the help of the Peterborough Town Library. And this is Peterborough, New Hampshire, approximately 1945. And this was the terminus of the railroad that ran from Boston to Peterborough. And what they would do is they'd take these trains up just beyond this point, turn around a turntable and bring it back. I set this scene in 1945 as kind of a nostalgic tribute to the returning soldiers of World War II. I worked with Judy, whose last name I forget, at the town library, and she helped me identify these buildings here, like the Monadnock Ledger, which was here in the old Baptist church for decades. Santier's Garage was the person who owned this garage, and he was a Buick dealer. Roy's Market, of course, and the Congregational Church, and the Peterborough Lumber Company. Some of these weren't identified in the photographs that I used, and I, identified these buildings and kind of brought them back to prominence.
How long does it take you to research your work before you actually start painting?
Well, a lot of times when I research something, I'll take years gradually accumulating material. And by the time I'm set to do something, I'm very familiar with it. Mm-hmm. So then all I had to do when I wanted to do this work was I just had to call up some people, get some basic information as to which buildings were which, make sure that I didn't make any glaring mistakes that people would pick up on and say, well, this can't be Peterborough, New Hampshire, because. And it took about maybe 2-3 weeks. Most of what I had to do was I needed information about this area here, because the initial picture I had, there was a big corrugated steel shed that was blocking the view of this part of the train station and this view of the area. So what they did for a very, very small fee, I felt guilty taking it from them, but for about $1, they sent me a whole pack, this thick of Xerox copies of photographs that they had. And the thing that I find that's really pleasant about working with these people is that they have, nobody really can make use of their resources, and they're always tickled to death when somebody does that comes along and has need of what they do. So most of these people are usually, very generous with their time and very generous with their, what they'll charge in order to help me get something done.
Your work is so detailed, so carefully done. How long would it take you to paint a piece like this?
Well, this piece didn't take that long. Some of the pieces that you'll see coming up, or the piece of Angel's Flight that we just saw, will take as many as 3.5 months. I have to do a preliminary layout. I do it on drafting paper, 20-pound bond. I then transfer it to the watercolor paper using just graphite and like a carbon paper sort of transfer. Then I start redrawing it as I go. And I start doing the highly detailed drawing with very, very hard, very sharp pencils. The hard, sharp pencils help guide the brush in those little tight spots to keep things as accurate as they are.
Okay. And so 3.5 months it takes you. Wow, I don't think I've seen this one before.
Nah, surprise, surprise.
What is this?
This is downtown Oakland around 1915. Now, this is going to be a book cover for a book entitled Streetcars in the East Bay, but I think it should be of the East Bay. I get this image of a streetcar being sunk in water, run them off the end of the pier. Now, this is Oakland at the corner of Broadway and San Pablo Street. This is Broadway. This is San Pablo. This runs out to Berkeley, as does Telegraph, and this runs out to the Oakland Hills where they had that disastrous fire a few years ago.
Now, what year is this?
Approximately 1915. Now, I dated this. It was thought to be 1920, but I said, no, the dress here, and I don't see any cars that really were into the 1920 era. I saw too many things like this Chevy, a 1914 Chevy Runabout, and a few other cars back in here that were just not of a later era. So having poured over a number of these vehicles for other paintings, you get to recognize certain things after a while.
Notice there are no traffic lights yet.
There are no traffic lights, there are no street markings, and things are rather chaotic. If you see here, you see this car pulling out in front of this car, and this car is going to, looks like there's going to be a virtual collision. People are crossing every which way. And it wasn't until about, the 1920s, somewhere around 1922, that they actually started getting street markings and street street lights. First, like you'll see old pictures of downtown Detroit, they had traffic kiosks, and then they eventually gave way to traffic lights. So,
Is the perspective hard? I mean, you're talking to someone who has no artistic
Okay.
ability, whatever. Being able to do that building with the kind of perspective that you've done, it looks very, very difficult to me. Is that difficult? What's the most difficult part of painting a picture like this?
well, you know, the interesting thing, the hardest thing about painting and what hangs me up the most is making sure, and it's nothing to do with perspective, it's making sure that this stands out from this and what colors to pick and how to make the colors contrast. So if you come to a part where you want to have this building stand out and you have this for example color, this color here matches too closely to this color, then it won't stand out and the picture begins to wash out. So the most difficult part, the thing that gets me hung up the most, is selecting colors for this to stand out from this. You see the color differential from here to here?
Right.
That's probably the most time-consuming thing. And then making sure lines are straight. But the perspective is rather easy. There's a little perspective point here, and you can barely see it. I tried to do a good job of erasing it. There's another little perspective point or vanishing point here, and another one here. And those are essentially the only 3 points that I used. Sometimes you can get into very complex pieces of perspective, but you have to remember that you, for example, doing roofs,